You're already a leader, but how do you take it to the next level? As today's guest puts it, you need something you're not born with. You need presence, and it needs to be actionable. Well, hello and welcome to Executive Presence for Marketing Leaders. My name is Roger Courville, and welcome to another episode of Thought Leader Conversations, sponsored by the crew here at Virtual Venues, where you can instantly scale your virtual and hybrid event production team with a crew that helps you focus on something other than the tech. But we're not here to talk about us, and I'm excited to welcome to the virtual stage Dianna Booher, CSP, CPAE, we're going to get to that here in a second, author of more than, catch this, 50 books with major publishers, including the inspiration for today's chat, Creating Personal Presence, Look, Talk, Think, and Act Like a Leader. She's appeared under more big name logos than you can count, from NPR to Good Morning America to the Wall Street Journal and on, has won countless writing and publishing awards. She blogs on Forbes and CEO Magazine and HuffPost and Microsoft, and I think there are some others there too. But notably, Dianna is accomplished as a speaker, boasting the highest earned award from National Speakers Association, the CSP, the Certified Speaking Professional. I know how hard that one is to get, but going way beyond me, she has also been inducted into the CPAE Council of Peers Award for Excellence, which is the Speakers Hall of Fame. That's a big deal. Welcome, Dianna. Glad you're here. Tell us a little more about who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Roger. Basically, I'm an author. I started out not speaking, but just people called from the books. It's the best marketing thing I ever wandered upon. I really didn't plan it, but since I've sold my communication training company, primarily I am coaching other people to get their message out with their own published books.
And I know you coach and train and speak to more than just marketers, right? But if you're listening to this, I also want to encourage you. Not everybody is a professional speaker, but we are professionals who speak. And writing a book is a killer way to advance your career, or probably a bunch of other things that we'll talk about today. And your acumen with communication skills is particularly relevant given the topic of personal presence and how the fact that it's arguably ill-defined. Dianna, how do you define personal presence?
Well, there's not any kind of a measure stick out there about it, but I think of that as someone who is comfortable in their own skin. They are confident, they sound confident, they look confident, they're able to think on their feet under pressure and respond to questions very clearly. They're persuasive when they speak. And then there's the character component also: integrity, humility, empathy. All of those things count as well. The thing is, you can learn those first three things. I like your comment when you started, Roger, about we're not born with it. You can learn how to look, talk, and think like a leader and increase your presence. The character thing, you can't just learn that. You observe that, you're taught that by your parents, but it's not like you go to a one-day course and learn that.
Right. Yeah, you grow into that for sure. So maybe as a starting place, why would you argue that creating an executive presence or growing in your executive presence as a skill is more important now than ever?
Well, I think it's more important now because there's just distribution, a much wider of who you are. Even 20 years ago, we didn't put out videos all the time. We weren't using the social media platform. You just got perceived, if that's a good phrase, you were perceived by others through someone's interpretation, what they said about you, what they wrote about you. But now, with all the technology, people can actually see if you look confident, if you sound confident. They can hear you in your own words. And there's just distribution around the world, whereas we were limited 20 years ago to a geographic location and we didn't go beyond that. But now you say something now, they can hear you in North Korea or China or Shanghai or whatever.
Exactly. And in the digital context, it very well might live on forever. So
yes.
It's going to be out there representing you for a good long time.
That's a pro and a con too. It's valuable and it's a benefit that we can distribute what we think, what we feel, try to persuade someone to change their mind or their behavior. We can do that very quickly, but also the drawback is that much of that is edited. And what you're seeing is a scripted person, an edited, produced vision. So that's why you need all the different technologies to really form an opinion about someone.
I've got one thing to say to that. Yes. And you know what? Because, I earn my CSP the weird way, doing, 70% of my gigs virtually, right? I mean, my books were about how to move your presentations from on-site to online. And one of the challenges was just exactly that. People who showed up and somehow had a different expectation of themselves, like, oh, I'm on video now, so it's got to be perfect. No, this is just me. And maybe I'll throw this, maybe I'll describe to you my perspective, and then I would love your response, because I think I looked through your book, and your perspective is a lot more refined than mine. I just would coach people saying authenticity beats perfection every single day. And I think that fits into your vision of, your kind of broad umbrella with regard to how you defined presence. Because of that very fact, we all know that we can edit a video within an inch of its life. And, and if you never get off teleprompter, well, then now what?
Right. We see that downfall a lot of times in our political situations. People say, well, I don't know who the real person is because somebody else wrote the speech. They put it on the teleprompter. They cut out anything that didn't work or misspeak or an idea that they think is controversial. So we hear that all the time. And I agree with you that authenticity is far better than a choreographed, produced presentation. And that should be good news for marketers, because they have so many opportunities to catch someone being authentic. And if they're a marketer and like to do personal interviews, just like you're doing live, that works wonders for really communicating the essence of a person. When they have to think on their feet, when they can't be scripted and somebody else is not feeding them the lines.
For me, the beginning place was, be real, because
Yes.
Because that's the only way you can be, right? I mean, to your point about that you made early on about humility and integrity and character, I mean, you got to be you. At the same time, I would, of course, then follow up saying, you're wasting everybody's time and money if you're not practicing the living baloney out of this, so it feels really natural. So you aren't tempted to read the slides or read a script or something that, in that pursuit of faux perfection.
Yes, some people take that comment about be yourself as no prep,
Right.
and that's wrong. You do need to think about an issue, think about a controversial situation, think about how I would respond to a certain question. So get your thoughts together, certainly. And you need to learn your craft of holding someone's attention, learning how to question an audience, how to be engaging if you're on the stage. But it shouldn't be fake. And if you can do those things that are correct and engaging when you're live, then that's far superior than having someone just, like I said, edit you and produce you and pick out the things that they perceive to be the best clips, as opposed to the real responses under pressure when you don't know what's coming up. For example, you're sitting at McDonald's and you've got your kids or your grandkids there, and something happens and you see a car about to back up over and hit the playground fence or something, and immediately you scream, "Stop!" That's natural. That's authentic. It can't be choreographed. We'll take that same idea and that same authenticity of what you feel in a moment and do that in a Q&A session. If you're an executive and you get asked in the all hands on employee conference, you should know how to do that.
A few of the questions that come to mind involve, well, because we're in the middle of a political season, this recording will live on well beyond the election here in the States in a few months. But I know that marketers or senior executives run into many of the same challenges, whether it's dealing with a scandal or how they're perceived by those they lead. Just out of curiosity, how much do you think of personal presence counting in terms of electing our political leaders, or perhaps or perhaps how an executive might grow through the ranks in terms of moving up the food chain on the org chart.
Well, I think it counts in a tremendous amount in our political situation. You have voters all the time when they're polled, telephone polls or live polls, and people ask, why you're voting for them. And you hear them all the time and say, well, they look smooth or they're good looking or whatever. So people do make very shallow judgments in a political season, but it counts. It counts how they speak and how they look and how they move and are they approachable and the handshake they have and gestures they use. People pay a lot of attention to body language, but it's also critical for the executive who wants to move up in an organization, particularly if they're changing their responsibilities, they're moving to a new team, new group, or even a new organization. They have to win that confidence. I remember coaching an executive who was in moved from one company to another in a top 10, Fortune 10 company. And we worked a day and a half on his presentation for his first all employee, and have thousands and thousands of employees. But he knew how important that was. And he incorporated his life story, so to speak, where I've come from. I grew up in Germany. These are the things that I think are important and values. And this is how I've implemented those in my past company. So he wanted to, and he understood the value of making that connection with his employees because of being real and telling who he was and revealing things and being transparent, and also expecting or expressing empathy about being an employee when a new person takes over at the top and not knowing if your job is safe during a merger. So it's extremely critical that executives not just get up and spout numbers, this is how we did last quarter, not just spout initiatives. They have to build a link to employees to be engaged, to want to achieve with them, to feel that loyalty to them personally as well as the organization. All of that, I think, is critical to move up. And Roger, one other thing, the reason I know it's so critical is because when I'm coaching people in their presentation skills, I'll have executives, CEO, executive vice president call and say, we would like to promote, let's just use a name here, we'd like to promote Jim in our organization. He has all the technical know-how. He brings in more business than a lot of other people, but he just needs, and a lot of times here's where they fumble as they're talking to me on the phone and say he needs, well, I don't know what he needs. You'll have to assess that, but he needs polish. We can't put him in the executive ranks and have him go out and meet with our clients until he gets that presence. And usually they will use the word executive presence or polish. So I know it's important to them. I know how critical it is to not plateau about mid-management and just hit a ceiling when you're trying to go further.
Yeah, I've seen more than once, and I don't remember, it might have been Jim Collins or somebody I read eons ago talking about how the top ranked skill for senior executives tends to be relational rather than technical, right?
Yes.
And you've got to relate in a different way, right? Speaking to 1,000 people in front of you is very different than speaking to 10 people in front of you, or now do it in some other medium, right?
Yeah, doing it so that you make that personal connection, even though you're not face to face, is really a strange environment still, even after doing this 7, 8, 10 years. I don't know, you've probably been doing it even longer than the average executive. But that is a strange environment for them. And they do have to polish those skills. And you would be surprised, or at least I was surprised, let me put it that way, when I started coaching at the executive level, what difference little things make in someone's first impression. I had a CEO of a large financial, I don't know if it's the largest, but a very large financial agency call and ask me if I would try to assess someone's management skills by their writing and their speaking. And I'd never met that. He was sending me 4 executive vice presidents. I had never met them. And I said, I'm not sure that I can do this, Keith. I was talking to the CEO. I'm not sure I can just, pick up on how they come across personally from their writing. He says, well, all right, I'll understand that caveat, but I'm going to send you these samples. I looked through them, wrote him a one-page summary as he'd requested on the leadership and the presence and promotability of these executives. And when I sent them to him, he said, right on. And during that conversation, he made this comment. He said, I know that I need to get rid of this one executive vice president because he brings in billion-dollar clients. And when we send them out personally, just for a dinner, or they take them out on their yacht and they're entertaining for a weekend, he comes across in a sloppy way. And when I probed, he says, for example, his hair's hanging in his eyes. He doesn't have his tie exactly straight. Poor choice of words. His grammar is not polished. And I, until that conversation early on in my career, would have not thought that the CEO paid that much attention to how they came across in a social situation. But he said, oh, it's far more important. They have other people to do the technical things. They've had training in the technical skills, even in the interpersonal skills. It's those higher, those very nebulous issues that get them every time in a social situation. Even knowing what kind of topics to choose. I remember another executive talking about, he said, I go around and visit my mid-level managers once a year in each of the different offices. And he said, most of them understand how critical this dinner meeting is and the opportunities they have to ask me questions. But he said, I went to, and he was talking just the week recently, he said, I just had dinner. I only meet this person once a year. And he started throwing out these frivolous topics and flippant questions. And then he was at a loss for even what to say. And he said, I can't imagine someone not preparing for a dinner meeting and a conversation at that level. And so he was going to dismiss this person. He said, that's his job, to go out and bring in business and social settings. So the little things have a big impact. That's my point. Little things that you might not notice have a huge impact in your career.
Yes. And I don't have that level. I don't have that expertise that you do in that kind of context. But we also know that in just both written and or spoken communication, right? Just how you use your voice, right? You can't change the voice that you were born with, but you can change how you use the voice you were born with.
Right. You can learn vocal variety. You can learn pausing. You can learn how to use the appropriate word to describe something, how to tell good stories that, again, engage people. In the book, I talk a lot about storytelling and how important that is for an executive. I know when I was starting out in my career, after people started calling me from the book saying, come out and talk to us, then I knew I needed to up my game. And I got a speech coach. And we worked all day, 8 hours, on telling a 2-minute story. That's how important storytelling is.
I was actually just going to go there because you just naturally told some stories in the process of making a point, right? And whether you think in terms of some acronym like PSA, point story application, or something, leaders have to give stories and use anecdotes and analogies and stuff.
Yes.
When
and
you're, go ahead.
Big difference. There's a big difference between telling an anecdote and telling a story. Anecdotes are great. They work fine. But when you tell a story, maybe it's the story. It doesn't have to be about a person. It could be the story of the success of a product line that you've just launched. Or it could be saying, we were going up, we're Goliath, we're David with a slingshot going up against Goliath, the big company, the big organization that's our competitor. And you have to root for the person who's the central hero or heroine of the story. And that could be an inanimate object, it could be a company, it could be a team. But you have to engage people through that process of all the obstacles, all the challenges that they overcame to reach their objective, to be successful if you're talking about a product or a service or a company. So there is a difference. And I've found in coaching executives, many times they don't know the difference between telling an anecdote and telling a real story. The anecdote, is just a slice of life. It's the other day I went into the bank and this is what they said to me. And so I walked out 30 minutes later, still not have accomplished my goal. That's an anecdote. But a story really is what engages people. And I never try to tell a story that I haven't practiced. Now, the ones that I just talked to you about, those were anecdotes.
We're just having a conversation. Yeah.
Just explaining. But when you really want to tell a story as an executive in your organization and you want to engage a group, then that story needs to be planned. There's a structure to doing that.
Exactly where I was going to go, because our brains are wired for story. In fact, there's one of the people that I quote in some of my research is a gal named Michelle Crossley, who's a psychologist and wrote a book and has an area of specialty called narrative psychology. And she actually argues that toddlers begin to understand story structure before they might even understand all of the elements of the story. Right. And so I'm probably go the other direction. I don't create the distinction between, say, anecdote and story in your more exacting way. But I do point out that our brain is wired for the basis of this story form. And, what's you got a beginning and an end, but in the middle, there's an inciting incident. And, how do we go from problem to promise with some kind of a path in the middle? How do we resolve that cognitive dissonance? And the challenge, particularly, I find is telling stories takes time, right? Sometimes we have to, to fit our presentation into the 18-minute slot or whatever it is that we've got to make strategic choices about facts and stories. And it's way too easy to, as Grandpa used to say, squeeze 50 pounds of spuds into a 5-pound sack.
That's true. And a lot of people throw in extraneous details. You want to select details carefully that either set the mood, set the mindset, and then the punchline is very important. Now, when you say punchline, most people think humor, ha-ha, joke, but that's not necessarily part of a story. Story could be a sad story, but the point needs to be very polished and be the final thing that you say in your story. So it takes skill, it takes practice, it takes know-how. But, Roger, I think one of the things that is even tougher for sometimes the mid-level professional to get to the executive rank is knowing how to analyze and summarize succinctly when they're making a presentation to that executive level. You have to do that as a marketer all the time. You've got 15 seconds or 30 seconds on TV if you're paying big bucks, thousands of dollars for an ad. And even in social media, it's cheaper, but it's even more important because people are scrolling. But I find that being able to take a lot of information and summarize it is part of your executive presence. That part that I talked about when you asked me earlier to define it, being able to say clearly, draw a clear conclusion, and summarize that succinctly is invaluable at the executive level.
That is a killer point. Even as you were talking about that, brain was going back to groups of engineers that I was training in a big company once. I was flying around to their offices and working with their engineers, all of whom were like, in the top echelon, highly educated. And my example to them was, hey, think back to college. You've got an academic paper. That academic paper has 20 pages of hardcore details. But what's at the front? One paragraph summary that tells the whole story. So I know when you're standing in front of the C-suite and you're making a presentation, you want to get down into the weeds because that's where you live.
Yes.
But
that's a key complaint from executives. They say they know their point. They know they can respond to a key question that focuses on the technical part. But when they get to the Q&A session, they want to get too far in the weeds. They can't succinctly answer a question.
Which just takes practice, right? To your point earlier, that's not an unlearnable skill, but it does take a little bit of practice if it doesn't come out of you naturally. Like me, I think verbosity is a spiritual gift, but or that's
as far more people believe that way than not. And that's the reason we teach when I used to teach presentation skills. Now I just do the one-on-one coaching, but when I was doing training programs, and I would ask people what's the most difficult part of doing a presentation, they would always say the Q&A, because I get down in the weeds. So we taught a formula, for a 4-part formula for being able to summarize succinctly, particularly when you're asked questions. And then, of course, when you get the tough questions like the know-it-all question, the hypothetical question,
The
the
question that
2
is,
option question,
I'm just
all of those tough ones are even more skill. You have to have more skill to do those.
the question that isn't the question, that isn't actually even a question, because I'm just trying to show off how much I know.
The show-off question, yes. We've got about 12 of those named, and they all, you deal with them all in a different way. And once people learn that, in fact, I've put it on a little 8x11 laminated sheet, to pass out, because they're anywhere from 3 to 7 or 8 different techniques according to hostile question, hypothetical, show off, etc. And if you get what I call the routine question, then that's when you use that generic formula to present what you want to say in a way that they understand it clearly. You touch them logically, back to Aristotle's model for being persuasive. You have to touch them logically, you touch them emotionally, and then they have to believe in your goodwill. They have to trust you. And so you have to accomplish all of those, even if you're giving a 2-sentence answer to a question. That's difficult. It takes practice, as you said.
So give one example or tactic for how someone might answer a question. Now, you mentioned there's a bunch of different types of questions and there's a bunch of different tactics. Choose one just as an example so someone has an understanding of how you're thinking.
All right, well, let's talk about the hypothetical question. Many times, well, what would you do, etc. The first thing you have to do is to decide, is this a legitimate question, or am I going to get down in the weeds? You never answer it. I know you told me to give you a technique here. Don't ever answer a hypothetical, because most of the time when somebody's asking you a hypothetical question, they have a point to make. They are trying to argue with you and lead you to their point of view. So the first thing you do is to sidestep that and just probe for the issue or the concern. So maybe somebody's asked you a hypothetical question and you say, is the reason you're asking that question, are you asking about, would we increase our cost if we bought that particular software package? Well, let me talk about cost a minute. See, if you get involved in, last week, Billy at the Atlanta office wanted to install this software and it wouldn't work, then you're going to say, well, how much did that cost? Well, did they have a good installer? Well, how much did they have to pay that installer? And was it a compatibility issue? You're going to get in the weeds of that specific situation they're asking about, and you lose the rest of the audience. They're just totally, what does that have to do with me? And that's when they take a recess mentally, check their phone and check their email. So don't answer a hypothetical question. Probe for the issue or the concern, and then respond to that concern or address the issue, but separate that from their specific situation or hypothetical that they laid out.
Let's talk about your book for a second. The subtitle of your book, or at least the book we're talking about today, one of 493 books that you've written. But the subtitle mentions 4 components of presence: how you look, how you talk, how you think, how you act. Talk to me about the first one for a moment, how you look. Just curiosity, how do you find that? How do you guide that?
It's a lot of different things other than just, are they good looking? Are they ugly? That's immaterial, really. But what look has to do with is, first, your appearance. Is it symmetrical? Do you look sloppy? Do you look like you've put some thought into how you dressed? Is it appropriate for the occasion? So that's about the dress. But then there are other things about look. How you approach someone. Do you stand off in a corner and hug the wall, or do you walk up and shake hands with people? It's about your gestures. There are open gestures and closed gestures. Extending your arms up and out, it says welcomes questions. It welcomes a topic. When you throw up a finger like this, you're lecturing people. So gestures matter. Your handshake, how you walk, how you move, all of those have to do with your how you look to people. You've seen people that, in fact, I know somebody in my church I just talked to about 2 weeks ago, and I said, I have totally changed my impression of you. I think that you are a very warm person after we had a conversation, and I named the event where we had the conversation. But I said, for years, I've seen you from afar, and I thought you were unfriendly. And it was not that I'd ever talked to her. It was just she held her chin high when she walks, which is the way we usually assess arrogance. And so the body language that you see, you make an impression of people on people just immediately when you walk in the room. You look comfortable, you look ill at ease, you look stiff, you look laid back. They judge you look comfortable and confident. All of those immediately are assessed when they see you.
I would say the same thing virtually. Interestingly, for years, part of my work was doing the same thing, but saying, how do we adapt it? Right? It might be more obvious, like if you're on 24 or Zoom or WebEx or something, going, okay, if I'm going to make a physical gesture, I need to make sure that my hands are within the camera scope, right?
Yes.
Opposed to outside of the camera scope where that doesn't count for anything. But there are also other tools that are part of the psychosocial experience of the person on the other side that is part of how you show up. And you may not have thought of that because it's a totally different environment.
Yes. And just even when you're on Zoom, just leaning back in your chair, you've talked to people who are leaning back in chair. And sometimes when they want to make a point, they lean very close to the camera. You do have movement options about your movement when you're online.
Yep.
But staying in the frame, obviously, the more you practice, the better you are at that. But it's just a change. It's not good or bad. It's just different. And you have to adapt to that. In addition to the way you look, your presence comes across, as I mentioned, through how you talk. Do you use the same word over and over? You've talked with people who use, I did a blog about this not too long ago, the 3A words: amazing, absolutely, and awesome. And everything they say, that's amazing, that's awesome. That, you're next in line and you hand them your application for something. Awesome. I mean, is that really awesome? If you use cliches all the time, you get known for that. That does not enhance your presence. But the way you structure sentences, the variety, your difference in the volume and how you inflect words to emphasize, pausing, all of that makes an impression on someone about how comfortable you are, how authentic you are, how concerned you are about what they're going to have to do or not do based on what you're telling them.
If we go back decades, I spent a chunk of my life as a sound engineer. I was in the music business.
Oh,
So
I didn't know that.
I'm kind of geeky about how somebody sounds. And we know there are triggers in the brain relative to voice. In fact, there was a study where they studied matching vocal quality with image quality. And that was actually a study done with people with cleft palates. And there, in the world of science, there are scales for evaluating higher or lower image, like a visage, or higher or lower attractiveness with regard to voice. What they found was that the attractiveness of your voice changed the perception of the attractiveness of your face. But it didn't go the other way. Meaning, I got a face made for radio, so I'm very glad. But that's the power of having a great microphone, or that, just to your point about using your voice well. It's one thing to use it well in terms of grammar and enunciation or pausing appropriately. It's another thing to make sure you sound good.
Very true.
My humble
And
opinion.
most people hate the sound of their own voice. Once they hear a recording, they just do not like it. But you can improve that. Sometimes you can even change the range, but you certainly easily can change things and improve things, like your understanding of emphasis, inflecting a word, highlighting something, allowing stronger pausing, longer pausing, so that people really think about what they just heard. All of those are just so so easy to learn and to change and improve.
We kind of evolved from the visual to the oral, but let's go back to the visual for a second, because something came to mind as you were talking about how one gestures. Facial expressions, wild gestures, can you be too expressive or too open to be taken seriously in terms of your own presence?
Yes, if your gestures or your voice or your enthusiasm does not match what you're saying, your topic, then it's not appropriate. Most people don't have to worry about that. I found in a presentation, because most people sort of fear that, and they tamp down their enthusiasm. They're standing up to make a presentation in the boardroom, and they don't want to sound too invested, if they're presenting 2 options or 3 options. So they try to present them all as if they were equal. That's not a good idea. If you're trying to persuade someone to do something, you need to have that enthusiasm in your voice. You need to sound like this is something that excites you, and you're looking forward to the client or the would-be client accepting this and getting aboard. But you can, if you're talking about a serious topic, maybe there's an executive who's passed away, killed in a plane accident or something, or you're talking about a merger and people are fearful of losing their job, but it's just a more serious topic, treating it in a lighthearted way with jokes or one-liners, that doesn't work. So I would say, to your question, you can be too flippant if you're on a serious topic. But most of the time, you don't have to worry about being too passionate when you want to emphasize something, when you want to sell an idea, you want to push across a recommendation and how much you believe in it. Don't tamp that enthusiasm down. You need to show that.
Continue down that path a little bit. You've in your book, you mentioned, you talk about the appropriate use of humor.
Yes.
You have a few pointers from I think you had a checklist in there, like called helpful humor or something like that. Just out of curiosity, what's a tip or two that you would have for keeping humor appropriate?
Well, along the lines of what I've just talked about, you want to make sure that the humor is appropriate to the situation and the topic. We've all been in a situation where maybe somebody was expressing a real concern in a meeting about some loss in some way, some project they have that's behind deadline or whatever, and somebody makes a flippant remark. That's just inappropriate. That's not good use of humor. So it needs to match the topic, match the situation. But also another valuable tip, I think, is to use self-deprecating humor. If you're going to tell something where someone was a failure about something, make yourself the butt of that joke. If there's any way that people could be thinking that they're the object of your derision, stay away from that.
Right.
Make sure that you invite others to tell you your foibles. If you're the leader, you're the executive in the room, they have to know that it's okay to say something frivolous to you. Otherwise, they think that you're not approachable. And I'm defining humor here is not a joke necessarily,
Right.
but just looking at things in a lighthearted way. For example, you get cut off in traffic. You can be really angry when you come in, or you can think this is not an earth-shattering situation. And looking at something in a lighthearted way is always appropriate.
Your book mentioned a tweet you did more than 2 years ago that is still circulating. Talk about that. That sounds fun.
Yes. That tweet, let me see if I can recall it exactly. If you can't say your message, if you can't express your message in a sentence, you can't say it in an hour. And that has gone around. It's in different, if you look up joke collections or quote collections, you'll see that in a lot of different places. And what I'm talking about, what I'm getting at there, is the ability to be succinct, to be concise. And some people, when I try to coach them on their presentation, I'll say, can you tell me one sentence? If you had to get on an airplane, or we're talking on the phone, and I'm saying, I'm getting on an airplane, 15 seconds, tell me what was the point of the meeting, or what did you decide? If you can't succinctly state that in a sentence or two, you are not ready to make a presentation. You are not ready to write an email. That is tough. It's hard. You can learn how to do it. But just going on with more and more information does not improve the presentation. Going on and on with more details in an email does not improve the clarity of your message many times. That one sentence overview as you start an email, and by the way, your presence does come across in your writing. That one sentence or two sentence overview in a presentation is extremely important, and it reveals your ability to think strategically and to analyze and synthesize a lot of information.
Talk to me a little bit about some of the various places that your organization touches down. You do coaching. You write a lot of books. What else do you do?
Yes. For years, I have written a book a year, sometimes two books a year. So that is my main thing. But people call, organizations call all the time saying, can you come out and tell our people how to do this, teach our people how to do this? And then coaching, more and more doing the coaching one-on-one with someone who wants to improve their presence. Either I go to them or they come to me. And then the very best way to market, I would say, even though I'm talking to supreme marketing leaders, the best way to market is with a published book with a major publisher because it has staying power. I have had over 78% of all my clients through the years, decades of work, call because of a book. They say, I'm in the library, picked up this book, or I'm in Barnes & Noble and I picked up this book, and can you come out and talk to us about it? So the executives who want to promote their career, their organization, a key project, they write a book about it because it gets distributed worldwide where they may not be able to go themselves. And it creates that real one-on-one connection. When you're reading an author's words, you think you know them, you trust them, you feel with them about what they're saying. So that's the next step. And as I say, from the particularly nonfiction authors that I know that are entrepreneurs that have a business, who've established a new company, they write a book to promote it at some point, not too early. They need to have experience, but they ultimately write a book, publish it with a major publisher, and it gets out there. So what I'm doing now is helping a lot of other people. I've written everything I know, Roger, in 50 books. I've written everything I know. So I'm helping other people coach and get their message out.
Two questions as we wrap up here. The first one is this. Are there any questions I should have asked you that I haven't?
Well, I maybe would, if I were listening, would want to know, how do you measure presence? Is there some measurement to it? And my answer to that is no. We don't measure it as you would measure someone's running distance. How fast did they do a mile, or how high did they jump, or how far did they throw this discus? But there is a general sense of measurement when you think about the components, the 20 components that I talked about in the book, and I think of it as a continuum. How far along are you? I have never mastered very few things have I mastered. And executive presence is one of those that you're always extending your mastery. You're always learning. You're always getting better at it. But in the same way, when I said you can't measure, you can measure someone's pulse. You can measure how quickly they recover from exercise, but you can look at someone and assess if they are generally fit. They are generally healthy. And in the same way, you can look at someone, interact with them, and have a sense of their personal presence. So although you're never mastering, you're always on a continuum, you do sense that about people.
How do you recommend someone move further along on the continuum toward stronger personal impact? Is there a process to it?
There is a process, and those 4 buckets that are in the title of the book, Look, Talk, and Think, Act Like a Leader, paying attention to specific learnable things. Not the last one on character, how you act. You can't teach someone to have integrity. You hope they've absorbed that and developed it by adulthood. You can't teach reputation, things, humility, things like that. The first 3 are learnable. And so as you learn what those specific skills are, you can practice those. And then I think it's very important to put a board around you. I don't mean necessarily advisory board or a formal board, but people who you don't control their destiny, and get honest feedback from them about what you need to improve. It's highly revelatory when you have people who, your spouse may be, and your kids, your adult kids may be far too critical, but to get people on an even keel who just like you but want to help you to give feedback on these skills would make a great deal of difference.
Yeah, who maybe even love you enough to be
To
straight.
say hard things.
Right, exactly. Dianna, thank you so much for spending a little time with us today.
Sure,
What's the best way to get in touch with you?
My primary website is Booher, like my name, spelled Booher, BooherResearch.com. Or if you're interested in the publishing coaching business, BooherBookCamp.com.
Fabulous. Well, thank you again to Dianna Booher, CSP, CPAE, for I don't even know how many wisdom nuggets you just dropped on us today. So thank you so much for doing that. And thank you again to our sponsor, Virtual Venues, where you can instantly scale your virtual and hybrid event production team. We'll see you on the next episode of Thought Leader Conversations.